Pythagoras in the Delphic Mysteries, relates the following incident as illustrative of the bond of fellowship uniting the members of the Pythagorean school. One of them, who had fallen upon sickness and poverty, was kindly taken in by an innkeeper. Before dying he traced a few mysterious signs, the pentagram, no doubt, on the door of the inn, and said to the host, "Do not be uneasy, one of my brothers will pay my debts." A year afterwards, as a stranger was passing by this inn, he saw the signs and said to the host, "I am a Pythagorean. One of my brothers died here. Tell me what I owe you on his account." Frank C. Higgins, 32, gives an excellent compendium of the Pythagorean tenets in the following outline. Pythagoras' teachings are of the most transcendental importance to Masons, inasmuch as they are the necessary fruit of his contact with the leading philosophers of the whole civilized world of his own day, and must represent that in which all were agreed, shorn of all weeds of controversy. Thus, the determined stand made by Pythagoras, in defense of pure monotheism, is sufficient evidence that the tradition to the effect that the unity of God was the supreme secret of all the ancient initiations is substantially correct. The philosophical school of Pythagoras was, in a measure, also a series of initiations, for he caused his pupils to pass through a series of degrees and never permitted them personal contact with himself until they had reached the higher grades. According to his biographers, his degrees were 3 in number. The first, that of Mathematicus, assuring his pupils proficiency in mathematics and geometry, which was then, as it would be now if Masonry were properly inculcated, the basis upon which all other knowledge was erected. Secondly, the degree of Theoreticus, which dealt with superficial applications of the exact sciences, and, lastly, the degree of Electus, which entitled the candidate to pass forward into the light of the fullest illumination which he was capable of absorbing. The pupils of the Pythagorean school were divided into exoterici, or pupils in the outer grades, and esoterici, after they had passed the third degree of initiation and were entitled to the secret wisdom. Silence, secrecy and unconditional obedience were cardinal principles of this great order. See Ancient Freemasonry. Pythagorean fundamentals. The study of geometry, music, and astronomy was considered essential to a rational understanding of God, man, or nature, and no one could accompany Pythagoras as a disciple who was not thoroughly familiar with these sciences. Many came seeking admission to his school. Each applicant was tested on these 3 subjects, and if found ignorant, was summarily dismissed. Pythagoras was not an extremist. He taught moderation in all things rather than excess in anything, for he believed that an excess of virtue was in itself a vice. One of his favorite statements was, "We must avoid with our utmost endeavor, and amputate with fire and sword, and by all other means, from the body, sickness; from the soul, ignorance; from the belly, luxury; from a city, sedition; from a family, discord; and from all things, excess." Pythagoras also believed that there was no crime equal to that of anarchy. All men know what they want, but few know what they need. Pythagoras warned his disciples that when they prayed they should not pray for themselves. That when they asked things of the gods they should not ask things for themselves, because no man knows what is good for him, and it is for this reason undesirable to ask for things which, if obtained, would only prove to be injurious. The god of Pythagoras was the monad, or the one that is everything. He described God as the supreme mind distributed throughout all parts of the universe, the cause of all things, the intelligence of all things, and the power within all things. He further declared the motion of God to be circular, the body of God to be composed of the substance of light, and the nature of God to be composed of the substance of truth. Pythagoras declared that the eating of meat clouded the reasoning faculties. While he did not condemn its use or totally abstain therefrom himself, he declared that judges should refrain from eating meat before a trial, in order that those who appeared before them might receive the most honest and astute decisions. When Pythagoras decided, as he often did, to retire into the temple of God for an extended period of time to meditate and pray, he took with his supply of specially prepared food and drink. The food consisted of equal parts of the seeds of poppy and sesame, the skin of the sea onion from which the juice had been thoroughly extracted, the flower of daffodil, the leaves of mallows, and a paste of barley and peas. These he compounded together with the addition of wild honey. For a beverage he took the seeds of cucumbers, dried raisins with seeds removed, the flowers of coriander, the seeds of mallows and purslane, scraped cheese, meal, and cream, mixed together and sweetened with wild honey. Pythagoras claimed that this was the diet of Hercules while wandering in the Libyan desert and was according to the formula given to that hero by the goddess Ceres herself. The favorite method of healing among the Pythagoreans was by the aid of poultices. These people also knew the magic properties of vast numbers of plants. Pythagoras highly esteemed the medicinal properties of the sea onion, and he is said to have written an entire volume on the subject. Such a work, however, is not known at the present time. Pythagoras discovered that music had great therapeutic power and he prepared special harmonies for various diseases. He apparently experimented also with color, attaining considerable success. One of his unique curative processes resulted from his discovery of the healing value of certain verses from the Odyssey and the Iliad of Homer. These he caused to be read to persons suffering from certain ailments. He was opposed to surgery in all its forms and also objected to cauterizing. He would not permit the disfigurement of the human body, for such, in his estimation, was a sacrilege against the dwelling place of the gods. Pythagoras taught that friendship was the truest and nearest perfect of all relationships. He declared that in nature there was a friendship of all for all. Of gods for men. Of doctrines one for another. Of the soul for the body. Of the rational part for the irrational part. Of philosophy for its theory. Of men for one another. Of countrymen for one another. That friendship also existed between strangers, between a man and his wife, his children, and his servants. All bonds without friendship were shackles, and there was no virtue in their maintenance. Pythagoras believed that relationships were essentially mental rather than physical, and that a stranger of sympathetic intellect was closer to him than a blood relation whose viewpoint was at variance with his own. Pythagoras defined knowledge as the fruitage of mental accumulation. He believed that it would be obtained in many ways, but principally through observation. Wisdom was the understanding of the source or cause of all things, and this could be secured only by raising the intellect to a point where it intuitively recognized the invisible manifesting outwardly through the visible, and thus became capable of bringing itself en rapport with the spirit of things rather than with their forms. The ultimate source that wisdom could cognize was the monad, the mysterious permanent atom of the Pythagoreans. Pythagoras taught that both man and the universe were made in the image of God. That both being made in the same image, the understanding of one predicated the knowledge of the other. He further taught that there was a constant interplay between the grand man the universe and man the little universe. Pythagoras believed that all the sidereal bodies were alive and that the forms of the planets and stars were merely bodies encasing souls, minds, and spirits in the same manner that the visible human form is but the encasing vehicle for an invisible spiritual organism which is, in reality, the conscious individual. Pythagoras regarded the planets as magnificent deities, worthy of the adoration and respect of man. All these deities, however, he considered subservient to the one first cause within whom they all existed temporarily, as mortality exists in the midst of immortality. The famous Pythagorean signified the power of choice and was used in the mysteries as emblematic of the forking of the ways. The central stem separated into two parts, one branching to the right and the other to the left. The branch to the right was called divine wisdom and the one to the left earthly wisdom. Youth, personified by the candidate, walking the path of life, symbolized by the central stem of the, reaches the point where the path divides. The neophyte must then choose whether he will take the left-hand path and, following the dictates of his lower nature, enter upon a span of folly and thoughtlessness which will inevitably result in his undoing, or whether he will take the right-hand road and through integrity, industry, and sincerity ultimately regain union with the immortals in the superior spheres. Insert. The symmetrical geometric solids. To the 5 symmetrical solids of the ancients is added the sphere 1, the most perfect of all created forms. The 5 Pythagorean solids are the tetrahedron 2 with 4 equilateral triangles as faces. The cube 3 with 6 squares as faces. The octahedron 4 with 8 equilateral triangles as faces. The icosahedron 5 with 20 equilateral triangles as faces. and the dodecahedron 6 with 12 regular pentagons as faces. Continue.